Hello and welcome. In this presentation, we will be diving into the key updates from the landmark 2026 AHA/ACC Guideline for the management of acute pulmonary embolism. This guideline, authored by Krager and colleagues and published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, introduces several practice-changing concepts that are critical for every clinician to understand. Our goal today is to distill these updates into a clear, clinically relevant framework that you can apply at the bedside. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This presentation is intended for educational purposes only and is designed to be a high-level summary of the full guideline. It is not a substitute for your own clinical judgment or a replacement for reading the complete guideline document. We encourage you to perform your own thorough analysis. To understand the recommendations, we must first be familiar with the class of recommendation, or COR, and level of evidence, or LOE, framework. A Class 1 recommendation, shown in green, means that a treatment should be given, as its benefit strongly outweighs the risk. Class 2A, in yellow, indicates it is reasonable to give, with benefits still clearly outweighing risk. Class 2B, in orange, means a treatment may be considered, as the benefit is greater than or equal to the risk. And finally, Class 3, in red, indicates either no benefit or, importantly, potential for harm, and these treatments should not be used. The level of evidence tells us about the quality of the data supporting these recommendations. Level A is the highest quality, derived from multiple randomized controlled trials. Level B, either randomized or non-randomized, represents moderate quality data. And Level C, from either limited data or expert opinion, represents the lowest level of evidence. The diagnostic journey for acute pulmonary embolism begins with a thorough history and physical exam. For patients where the pretest probability is not high, the guideline reinforces the use of clinical decision tools. It gives a Class 2A recommendation to using an age-adjusted D-dimer or the Years algorithm to safely rule out pulmonary embolism without imaging. For patients with a high clinical probability, imaging is a Class 1 recommendation. And when imaging is delayed in a patient with suspected high-risk PE, that is, category C2 or higher, it is reasonable to initiate empiric anticoagulation to prevent clinical deterioration. This brings us to the updated diagnostic algorithm, shown here from Figure 1 of the guideline. For patients with a low pretest probability, the first step is to apply the PERC rule. If all criteria are negative, pulmonary embolism is safely excluded. If not, or if the patient has an intermediate pretest probability, the next step is D-dimer testing. Importantly, the guideline endorses two strategies to improve the specificity of D-dimer: the age-adjusted D-dimer and the Years criteria, both of which carry a Class 2A recommendation. We will discuss these in detail on the next slide. A negative D-dimer, using either the standard or adjusted threshold, rules out pulmonary embolism. Positive result warrants imaging. For patients with a high pretest probability, we bypass D-dimer entirely and proceed directly to imaging, most commonly a computed tomography pulmonary angiography, or CTPA. Let's take a closer look at the D-dimer, as the guideline provides important clarifications. First, be aware of your labs units. A cutoff of 500 micrograms per liter is used for fibrinogen equivalent units, or FEU, while a cutoff of 250 nanograms per milliliter is used for D-dimer units, or DDU. For patients over 50, the guideline gives a Class 2A recommendation to using an age-adjusted cutoff, calculated as the patient's age multiplied by 10 in FEU units. The second strategy is the Years criteria. If the patient has 0 Years criteria, those being signs of a deep vein thrombosis, hemoptysis, or pulmonary embolism being the most likely diagnosis, a higher D-dimer threshold of 1,000 may be used. If one or more criteria are present, the standard 500 threshold applies. Importantly, these two strategies can be used independently, but recent evidence from a multi-center randomized trial shows that combining the Years criteria with an age-adjusted D-dimer improves diagnostic efficiency compared with using age-adjusted D-dimer alone. Both approaches carry a Class 2A recommendation. Perhaps the biggest change in the 2026 guideline is the introduction of a new A through E clinical category classification system. This replaces the old massive, submassive, low-risk terminology. Category A is for subclinical or incidental pulmonary embolism. Category B is for symptomatic patients with a low clinical severity score. A critical correction here is that the distinction between B1 and B2 is based on anatomic location. B1 for subsegmental PE and B2 for non-subsegmental. It is not based on right ventricular dysfunction or biomarkers. Category C is for patients with an elevated clinical severity score. Category D is for patients with incipient cardiopulmonary failure, and Category E is for those in established cardiopulmonary failure. Diving deeper into Category C, it is divided into 3 subcategories. C1 patients have an elevated clinical score but normal right ventricular function and normal biomarkers. C2 patients have an elevated score with either an abnormal right ventricle or an elevated biomarker. C3 patients have both. The guideline also introduces a respiratory modifier, designated with an R, which is crucial for risk stratification. However, the criteria for this modifier differ by category. For Category C, it is defined as a respiratory rate of 30 or greater, an oxygen saturation below 90%, or the need for any supplemental oxygen. For Category D, the oxygen requirement is higher, greater than 6 liters by nasal cannula or the use of a non-rebreather mask. For Category E, it signifies frank hypoxemic or ventilatory respiratory failure. Finally, let's define Categories D and E. Category D1 is characterized by transient hypotension that responds to fluids, while D2 represents normotensive shock, where the patient has a normal blood pressure but shows signs of hypoperfusion, such as an elevated lactate or acute kidney injury. Category E1 is defined by persistent or recurrent hypotension with cardiogenic shock. And Category E2 is the most severe state, refractory cardiogenic shock or a full cardiac arrest. This brings us to the central management algorithm, which maps our new clinical categories to initial treatment actions. For low-risk categories A and B, a direct oral anticoagulant, or DOAC, is the recommended Class 1 choice. For higher-risk categories C through E1, parenteral anticoagulation with low molecular weight heparin, or LMWH, is preferred. For the most critical patients in Category E2, either low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin may be used. Notice how the diagnostic and risk stratification steps align with the categories. Simple risk scores like the Pulmonary Embolism Severity Index are used for categories A and B. Cardiac biomarkers become a Class 1 recommendation starting at Category C. And as we corrected, measuring lactate, evaluating the right ventricle, and activating the Pulmonary Embolism Response Team, or PERT, are all Class 1 recommendations that begin at Category C1. Let's formalize the components of risk stratification. The guideline gives a Class 2A recommendation to using clinical risk scores like the Pulmonary Embolism Severity Index, or PSI, or the HESTIA criteria as decision tools to identify low-risk patients who may be suitable for outpatient management. For identifying higher-risk patients, the key tools are cardiac biomarkers like troponin and B-type natriuretic peptide, which carry a Class 1 recommendation, and right ventricular imaging, preferably with an echocardiogram, which is also a Class 1 recommendation. One important negative recommendation: assessing the thrombus burden on computed tomography is not recommended for risk stratification, as it does not reliably predict adverse outcomes. The core principles of anticoagulation remain robust. All patients with acute pulmonary embolism should be started on anticoagulation unless an absolute contraindication exists, a Class 1 recommendation. For most patients, direct oral anticoagulants are recommended over vitamin K antagonists. And when parenteral therapy is needed, low molecular weight heparin is recommended over unfractionated heparin. As mentioned earlier, for patients in Category C2 or higher, it is reasonable to start empiric anticoagulation if a delay in imaging is anticipated. The guideline provides specific advice for several special populations. In patients with obesity defined as a body mass index over 30, a direct oral anticoagulant is a reasonable choice over a vitamin K antagonist. For pregnant patients, low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin are the Class 1 recommended agents, while direct oral anticoagulants and warfarin are considered harmful. For breastfeeding mothers, low molecular weight heparin, unfractionated heparin, or warfarin are recommended over direct oral anticoagulants. And in patients with mild to moderate chronic kidney disease, a direct oral anticoagulant is the preferred class 1 choice over a vitamin K antagonist. Continuing with special populations, for patients with cancer-associated thrombosis, a direct oral anticoagulant or low molecular weight heparin is the class 1 recommendation for extended phase therapy. In patients with established thrombotic antiphospholipid syndrome, a vitamin K antagonist remains the class 1 choice over a direct oral anticoagulant. For liver disease, the choice depends on the Child-Pugh class. Direct oral anticoagulants are reasonable in class A, may be reasonable in class B, but are considered harmful in class C. Finally, in patients with brain tumors, a direct oral anticoagulant may be considered over low molecular weight heparin. The guideline clarifies the role of antifactor Xa monitoring for low molecular weight heparin. Routine monitoring for most patients is not indicated, a class 3, no benefit recommendation. However, monitoring is reasonable in patients with severe chronic kidney disease, and its usefulness may be considered in pregnancy or severe obesity, though it is not well established. When monitoring is performed, a peak level drawn 3 to 5 hours after a dose is the recommended approach. Identifying low-risk patients who can be safely managed in the outpatient setting is a key goal. The guideline gives a Class 2A recommendation to using a validated decision tool, such as the Hestia criteria or the Pulmonary Embolism Severity Index, to select these patients. This approach is reasonable for patients in categories A and B. A critical component of safe outpatient management is ensuring prompt follow-up, which is a Class 1 recommendation to occur within 1 week of discharge. The guideline gives a strong Class 1 recommendation for the use of a multidisciplinary pulmonary embolism response team, or PERT, for the management of patients in categories C through E. Similar to a code stroke or STEMI team, a PERT brings together experts from various specialties to facilitate rapid, shared decision-making for complex cases. Studies have shown that PERT activation leads to faster anticoagulation, reduced use of inferior vena cava filters, and shorter hospital lengths of stay. Now we turn to advanced therapies. This traffic light guide, based on Table 7 of the guideline, provides a high-level overview. The key takeaway is that these therapies are reserved for higher-risk patients. For patients in categories A through C1, all advanced therapies are generally considered to provide no benefit or potential harm. The yellow zone, where therapies may be considered, generally starts at category C2 or C3. And the green zone, where therapies are considered reasonable, is primarily for patients in category E1. A critical point is that systemic thrombolysis is now considered harmful for patients in categories A through C2. Looking specifically at systemic thrombolysis, it is a Class 2A, or reasonable recommendation for patients in category E1 or E2. It may be considered for patients in category D or C3. But again, for patients in categories A through C2, it carries a Class 3 harm recommendation with a high level of evidence, BR. The guideline also notes that using a lower, half-dose of thrombolytic may be considered to reduce bleeding risk. Catheter-directed lysis, or CDL, and percutaneous mechanical thrombectomy, or MT, are additional options for advanced therapy. Their recommendations largely mirror those of systemic thrombolysis, being considered reasonable for category E1 and may be considered for categories C2 through D2. The recent Peerless trial, which compared ultrasound-assisted catheter-directed lysis to mechanical thrombectomy, found no significant difference in mortality or major bleeding between the two modalities. Surgical pulmonary embolectomy is another option for high-risk patients, carrying a Class 2A recommendation for category E1. For the sickest patients in category E2, veno-arterial extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or VAE.C.M.O, is a reasonable consideration to provide circulatory support. Finally, the guideline reinforces that routine placement of inferior vena cava filters in patients who are able to be anticoagulated is a Class 3 harm recommendation. After the initial 3 to 6 months of treatment, the decision to continue anticoagulation depends on the patient's risk of recurrence. For patients with a first pulmonary embolism and no major reversible risk factor, continuing anticoagulation is a Class 1 recommendation. Conversely, for patients whose pulmonary embolism was caused by a major reversible risk factor, such as a recent surgery, stopping anticoagulation at 3 to 6 months is recommended. For patients who continue on extended phase therapy, a direct oral anticoagulant is preferred, and using a reduced, half dose of apixaban or rivaroxaban is a Class 1 recommendation to reduce bleeding risk. A significant portion of the guideline is dedicated to the evaluation of long-term complications, primarily chronic thromboembolic pulmonary disease, or CTEPD. For patients with persistent symptoms 3 or more months after their acute pulmonary embolism, a diagnostic evaluation for CTEPD is a Class 1 recommendation. This typically involves a transthoracic echocardiogram and a ventilation/perfusion, or V/Q scan. For patients who are symptomatic but in whom CTEPD is excluded, a pulmonary rehabilitation program is a Class 1 recommendation to improve symptoms and exercise tolerance. And for those diagnosed with CTEPD with associated pulmonary hypertension, referral to an expert center is a Class 1 recommendation. In summary, the 2026 guideline introduces a paradigm shift in how we classify and manage acute pulmonary embolism. The A through E clinical classification system provides a more granular and clinically relevant framework than the old terminology. The recommendations for advanced therapies are now more nuanced, with a strong emphasis on avoiding harm in lower-risk patients. And there is a clear focus on the long-term evaluation for complications like chronic thromboembolic pulmonary disease. We strongly encourage you to read the full guideline document to understand the data and reasoning behind these important updates. And if you enjoyed this session, stay tuned because the world of anticoagulation and pulmonary embolism deserves its own deep dive, and we would love to bring you a focused discussion on anticoagulation. The agents, the dosing, the special populations, and the tough clinical decisions. Let us know in the comments if that is something you would like to see. Thank you for your attention.